What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you what I think is the best build in the game for solo flawlessing any dungeon. This season, I've solo flawlessed every dungeon, and I truly think it's never been easier than it is right now. I use different builds on every character to get different solo flawlesses, but if I was going to use one build to solo flawless them all, this would be it. That is because it mixes exceptional survivability with great damage output. This build is incredibly easy to stay alive with, probably easier than any build in the game for any dungeon type content. And then the damage output is incredibly easy and consistent. So the reason I say it's the best is because in my opinion, it's the safest build to use. You can maybe shave off a damage phase here or there on some other bosses with some different builds, but if you're going for a solo flawless, obviously not dying matters a lot. So with those disclaimers out of the way, let's look at the build. It starts with the exotic arms Syntheseps. They have the exotic trait Biotic enhancements. When you're surrounded, gain increased melee and super damage, as well as improved weapon handling and reload speed. On screen now are some in-depth stats on how the exotic actually works. This is from the Destiny Data Compendium, which is linked in the description of this video. But basically, your melee damage is increased by 165% and your super damage is increased by 50%. The melee damage increase used to be 300%, but Bungie nerfed this because it was pretty broken. That being said, your melee still hit incredibly hard. With the Bonk Hammer, Roaring Flames x3, and the Syntho buff, you can still nearly one-shot the Knights in the Ghost of the Deep dungeon. These are yellow bars who have a fair bit of health, so while the damage isn't what it once was, this build is still extremely strong and great for taking out high health targets quickly without having to waste your precious heavy or special ammo. So again, this is a reason why this build is so freaking good. Because you have an on-demand one-shot hammer that refreshes nearly instantly and cures you when you get a hit. If you're a longtime fan of the channel, you will know I have made 2 build videos on this prior to this one, and I've called it the strongest build in Destiny. When I made those 2 build videos, that was before Banner of War was in the game, so I would say Syntho or Wormgod Caress Strand Titan is now the strongest in the game, but as I keep trying to stress, this is still the best solo flawless build in the game thanks to its mixture of survivability, damage output, and extreme ease of use. In my opinion, the 3 hardest dungeons to solo flawless are Duality, Ghost of the Deep, and Warlord's Ruin. And when I went to solo flawless those dungeons, this was my first pick, and there's a reason for that. Also, when Warlord's Ruin came out, the vast majority of players who solo flawless it day 1 were on Titan. I know this because I saw a list from Cbro on Twitter showing the people who solo flawless it day 1, and I would say 70% probably were Titans. So now that I have fully stated why this build is so damn good, let's jump into the exact things that make up this build. Again, this build has changed over the years, so I will show you the best version to run so that you can abuse this extremely OP build to get yourself some solo flawless emblems. So we have shown the exotic, now let's look at the aspects. First up is Soul Invictus, which states Solar Ability Final Blows, Hammer of Soul impacts, and defeating scorched targets create a sunspot. Your abilities regen faster, and your super drains more slowly when standing in a sunspot. So the sunspots will give you twice as fast ability energy, which is really nice for grenade uptime, and they grant you restoration when you pass through them, which is great for survivability. And this used to reset your restoration timer, but with the patch update on March 5th, now this will just extend your restoration timer by a couple of seconds. This is a very nice quality of life fix and makes this build even stronger than it was when I was doing my solo flawless dungeons, because I did them all before the March 5th update. For the next aspect, we have Roaring Flames. Final blows with your solar abilities or ignitions increase the damage of your solar abilities, stacks up to 3 times. So normally at Roaring x3 you get a 73% damage increase, but with Wormgod's Caress or Syntheseps, this was kinda busted. So Bungie individually tuned this to only give you a 10%, 21%, or 33% damage bonus when these exotics are equipped. Regardless, this stacks with the perk on the exotics, so it is still a net gain in damage. Again, you can one-shot very high health targets with your hammer, it's just not as OP as it used to be. Speaking of your hammer, let's talk about that. We have the Throwing Hammer, or as I often call it, the Bonk Hammer, and it is crucial to this build. This was also nerfed because you used to be able to spam your hammer and it was more effective DPS than most weapons. And it used to be even more broken back in the day because it could stack with a 1-2 punch shotgun. But just so you know, it no longer does, and it can no longer be spammed. There is now a 1.4 second cooldown to be able to throw it after you pick it up, so you can't hammer instantly back to back anymore. But what I like to do is throw the hammer, then follow up with a regular melee on high health targets. This is usually enough to kill them anyways. But yeah, the hammer is still very strong even with these nerfs, and it provides you cure when you deal damage with the hammer, so it provides you huge survivability. Cure gives you like 60 health back when you pick up the hammer, but if you get a kill with that hammer, you also create a sunspot which will give you restoration. So for every hammer kill, you get a chunk of health as well as recovery from restoration. So when I say this build is damn near unkillable, I mean it. But say you get in a pinch and miss your hammer to get all those health benefits, then I suggest running a healing grenade just in case. It's really nice to have as a backup because sometimes things just don't go as planned. If you are comfortable with being able to survive, then this isn't needed, but I just run it as a backup just in case. And truthfully, you don't even really need grenades with this build thanks to how easy it is to kill everything. For fragments, these don't matter all that much either. The two main ones you must run are Ember of Torches to give you Radiant when you deal damage with a melee ability. This is extremely strong, and a 25% damage bonus is super helpful for knocking off damage phases in your solo dungeon attempts. And then you want Ember of Empyrean, which extends Restoration and Radiant when you get solar ability or weapon kills. So like I said before, this got fixed on March 5th, and now sunspots no longer reset your timer. And in that update, your Resto and Radiant timer can now go to 15 seconds, so for this build in particular, these changes actually gave us a buff. For other fragments, you can run what you like, but I will give you a couple suggestions. Ember of Solace makes your Radiant and Restoration effects last 50% longer, so this is nice for ease of use and makes this build even more safe. And Ember of Searing is nice because killing scorched enemies gives you melee energy, so in the off chance you lose your hammer, you can get it back quickly with this fragment. Your melee is the driver behind this entire playstyle, so not having it is a huge detriment, and this fragment will let you get it back very quickly if you lose it. Additionally, one thing I want to add is when you have Roaring Flames going, if you do a regular melee, it will keep your Roaring Flames timer going. It won't give you Roaring Flames if you don't have it at all, but as long as you have at least one stack, then you can just use regular melees. This is extremely important to know and something I abuse a lot. I will just regular melee things like Taken Scions or Hive Thrall. They are very elusive and shifty, so your hammer will often miss on them. So I just find it easier to punch them instead. It is just as quick to kill and it locks on so you shouldn't miss. And your Roaring Flames melee also counts as a charged melee, so we'll activate things like Heavy Handed, which is important for when we get to the mods. So truly, knowing this interaction is one of the most important things to know with this build. Again, I use the regular melee a ton now since the hammer got its cooldown nerf. And then when I reach a high health target, then I just bonk them with my throwing hammer. On this note, having different keybinds for your charged and regular melee is a good idea. I made a video on how to do this a long time ago, so check that out if you need a hand. So we have the build made, now let's look at the mods, because they are very important here. On the helmet, I have hands on for more super energy with a melee kill. This is obviously really good as this whole build is just us getting melee kills. And then heavy ammo finder. So if you're low on heavy, start getting some kills with your primary weapon and hopefully you'll get a brick. On the arms are some important mods too. You want 3 heavy-handed mods. These got nerfed a while ago to where they now have a cooldown for your orb generation. So running 1 will give you a 10-second cooldown until you can make another orb of power. Running 2 will be a 5-second cooldown, and 3 will only be a 1-second cooldown. So I run 3, which allows me to make an orb of power every second with a melee kill. And again, this will work with a regular melee if you have Roaring Flames going, not just a bonk hammer kill. So this is really important to know. On the chest, we just have resist mods depending on the encounter. So for something like Ghost of the Deep final boss, 2 arc resist and 1 solar resist is good. Then we have the boots. I have recuperation, which gives you a chunk of about 70 health when you pick up an orb. So not only do we have restoration going almost constantly, but when we pick up an orb, which we'll do pretty much every melee kill thanks to the 3 heavy-handed mods, we'll get a chunk of health. And if we get a hammer kill, we also get a stack of cure when we pick up the hammer, which is 60 health. So you are walking around with constant restoration while getting chunks of 70 to 130 health back with every melee kill. This is why this build is so damn good for survivability. Then we are walking through sunspots which lower our ability cooldowns, and we have healing grenades if we are caught in a pinch. And then we also have Innervation, which gives us 10% grenade energy every time we pick up an orb. So we have near constant uptime on our grenade as well, in the rare instance that we do have to use it. Which, like I said, we really only do in a pinch. And then you want Scavenger on your boots that matches your heavy weapon. On the class item, I have Bomber and Outreach in case I need grenade or melee energy. And then this is very important. You want to run Healthy Finisher. This will consume 1 stack of armor charge and restore your health and shields on finish. I will get to why this is important in a minute. But first, I now want to look at the artifact mods. These mods were the reason I soloed every dungeon on every character this season, because they're OP as hell and make solo flawlessing easier than ever. First and foremost, you must run Solo Operative. This is a flat 15% damage boost to all your damage, so it will literally shave off damage phases for every boss. And the next mod is almost just as good, which is Revitalizing Blast. This allows your solo abilities to apply a 15% weaken to bosses. So again, this is why this build in particular is so damn good for solo flawless, because on the other characters you can apply this a couple times, but on Titan, your hammer is pretty much always on you, so you can just reapply it when it wears off. So on the first boss of Ghost of the Deep, if Revitalizing Blast wears off, you just bonk him again and then keep doing DPS. The only bosses that this is difficult to do on are Kel Echo, Samuma, and Heffend. The final bosses for Prophecy, Ghost of the Deep, and Warlord's Ruin. And even on them, you can throw your hammer and try to hit them, and then just wait for your hammer to come back before you start the next damage phase if you want. So it's still doable, but it is super easy on all the other bosses. And someone like Galron, who has like a 50-second damage phase, or the second boss of Warlord's Ruin, you can have Revitalizing Blast up at all times. So this is extremely powerful. And then we have the third must-run mod, which is Flint Striker. This gives you Radiant for landing crits. So normally this doesn't matter too much because your melees give you Ember of Torches and make you Radiant, but on the hard to hit bosses, this is important, especially Samuma and Ghost of the Deep. The damage phase is long, so you won't have Radiant the whole time, but something like Sleeper Simulant can give you Radiant off 2 crit shots, so you can keep it up the whole damage phase, and then chuck a grenade to proc Revitalizing Blast partway through for even more damage, and throw your hammer if you want to risk it. For other artifact mods, Kindling Trigger is really nice for applying Scorch, which can work with Ember of Searing if you need melee energy, or it can also make a fire sprite. Raise of Precision is nice for mass ad clear if you want, and Argent Ordnance is a 15% bonus to rocket damage if you're using rockets. But it does consume your armor charge, so watch out for that. But I used this on Kel Echo and got a 1 phase. So about the armor charges. This is why running Healthy Finisher was important. I highly recommend you do loadout swaps before your DPS rotations. So the loadout I gave you was the lead up to any damage phase. It has great survivability, mods to get your super very quickly for damage, and a scavenger mod to get lots of ammo back between our damage phases. And then Healthy Finisher will hold 3 armor charges for you so that you have 3 charges for a damage phase. So then right before you start a damage phase, switch to a preset loadout which has all the same aspects, fragments, and abilities, but then has 3 weapon surges that match your heavy weapon on your boots. So if I was using a solar heavy, I would have 3 solar weapon surges. Then on your mark, you want to have at least 2 time dilation mods, or ideally 3. If you have 3 time dilation mods and 3 armor charges, these surges will last for a minute, which is basically longer than any damage phase you will run into in any dungeon. I have a video that I put out yesterday going over loadout swaps in more detail if you're interested. As for weapons, I liked a Solar Legendary for proccing Kindling Trigger and extending Resto and Radiant with Ember of Empyrean. The rest is up to you, and depends on the boss really. I have full guides for every dungeon, so check those out if you want specific loadout suggestions for each boss. The Lament is great on close range bosses, Rockets on others, it just depends on the encounter. Same with the super you select, which is why I didn't mention a super in this video. And in some cases, it is also worth to swap to Pyrogales for a quick one-off super to start the damage phase like on the first boss of Warlord's Ruin. But again, this is totally encounter dependent. But I hope with the way I laid this video out, you can see why this build is the ultimate go-to for an easy solo flawless on any dungeon. Or it's awesome for speedrunning Lost Sectors as well. I truly believe it is the best all-around loadout to use. Is it the most optimal for every single situation? Absolutely not. But it is pretty great in any situation, and it gives you an awesome mix of power output paired with exceptionally good survivability. Like, getting to damage phases with this loadout is easier for me than any other in the game. It's just mindless. You just destroy everything and barely ever have to worry about surviving. For stats, you definitely want to prioritize 100 resilience, and then from there, I spec into discipline. And for the rest of the artifact mods, you do you. Torch, From Whence You Came, and Wished Into Being are all also very good to run. Again, for more info on individual encounters, check out my dungeon guides, but this would be the build I would recommend for beating any dungeon. It's just too good in so many areas. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope it was helpful, and if it was, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Let me know down in the comments if you tried this build and if it helped you to get a solo flawless. It would make my day. And if you're still watching, then I appreciate you for watching to the end. Good luck in your solo flawless dungeons and take care.